Hello everyone, I am Sandeepan, Director at the Foundation for Agrarian Studies. And I take this opportunity to once again welcome you all to the 8th seminar of the FAS Young Scholar online seminar series. I can safely assume that by now all of you or most of you already know FAS very well and also know about this Young Scholar seminar series which we have been holding since the month of April 2022. A formal introduction, therefore, I don't think is in order. I must, of course, thank those who have been most consistent, absolutely instrumental in carrying forward this series with the momentum that it requires. The first being Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung South Asia for believing in the idea. But most importantly, I would say to Professor Barbara Harris-White, whose enthusiasm, if I may say, throughout the series has mirrored our own enthusiasm. Today we have Dr. Deepak Johnson as the speaker who will discuss his doctoral work on rice incomes in Kerala and Vietnam. Thank you, Deepak, for agreeing to be part of it at a very short notice. And we are absolutely privileged to have Professor Takahashi Rui from Tokai University, Japan, as the discussant. Now, I leave the detailed introductions to the chair, but before I hand it over to the chair, may I request your attention for a few minutes for a few announcements that are in order. Now, this, as you all know, is the 8th seminar of the series, where young scholars of rural and agrarian India have presented their research. Most of them are in the advanced stages of their doctoral work or have recently submitted their theses. So, and this seminar series has given them a platform to discuss and fine-tune their research work, and in the process, hopefully, is also being successful in building a network of such scholars. And I must point this out, that when I was going through this, the 8-9 seminars that sort of we have planned for this series, I realized that 3 or maybe 4 of them, of these young scholars, have based their research work significantly, in a significant sense, on the method and or the database of the Foundation for Agrarian Studies. This, among other things, to me is also indicative of the possibilities in the FAS database, a database of primary data from 27 villages across the country from different agroclimatic zones. And it also shows the potential of the method, excuse me, to study differentiation in the Indian countryside, to study incomes, agricultural incomes, as well as household incomes, to study wages and employment in rural India. Here, I would like to show 3 or 4 ways in which perhaps these scholars have made use of this data, or in future they can continue making use of this data. Sujan, can you please put on the slide that I had requested? Yeah, okay. So you can see if that this is a sort of a tree structure of the different matrices that FAS has. The FAS database has. Some of these scholars have used thematic studies building on the baseline, which a baseline data that very in great detail captures the socio-economic structure of Indian villages. There are other scholars who have who have developed thematic studies based on this data. And some of these databases, some of these data matrices, I must point out, have not been used to its full potential. For instance, matrices such as unfreedom in the Indian villages, land markets and land transactions, adoption of technology. So that is that other a sort of way in which FAS data can be used to develop new research work. Yet there are also possibilities of studies on themes that we at FAS have studied but needs updating. There is possibility of longitudinal work in that direction. And finally, using the method, even when you are using other data, sort of going and doing village studies in different villages, the method of FAS is of, can be instrumental, as has been the case with I must say today's speaker, Dr. Deepak Johnson. I therefore would like to take this opportunity to invite young scholars to make use of our resources, visit our website, go through the resources that are available, and write to us, and we can explore together opportunities to work in the future. Let me also invite the scholars who have presented on this platform to at least develop short, precise blog posts based on the presentations that they had prepared, and send it across. They will be considered for publication as blogs based on the, of course, depending on the editorial process. And finally, may I request all you young scholars to please be in touch and visit us at FAS whenever you are in Bangalore. In case, please, there is possibility for detailed interaction on our database and methods. A few of us have actually planned to see us to come to FAS late December, and I can only hope that this will be only a beginning. So yeah, that was all by way of my introduction. I know I've taken more time than I intended to. So apologies on my behalf, and without further ado, let me hand it over to our chair, Professor Barbara Harris-White. Professor Barbara, if you can please.
Thank you very much, Sandeepan. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, yes.
I ask simply because this is a very exciting technological event when we are joining an audience of students, mainly in India, with 2 speakers in Japan and a chair who is sitting in a garden shed, which is not very well connected to the internet and which may collapse at any moment. So this is an experiment, and the topic for today is also extremely interesting. Farm incomes compared between Kerala and Vietnam. And I heartily second what Sandeepan has said about the value of the foundation data and the potential there is for all kinds of research, because we've heard very, very interesting projects on some of the database. But as you said, there's a lot more that can be developed. And the other thing that you alluded to, which FAS has contributed very creatively to, is to a network of young scholars. There's another one in SOAS in London, and there's one emerging in Sri Lanka with students in Pakistan. And it would be very nice to find a way of putting these networks together. Anyway, of that we may talk later. For now, we're going to have a presentation on farm income, rice income in Kerala and Vietnam from Dr. Johnson, who is at Hitotsubashi University in Japan. And our discussant is Dr. Takahashi from Tokai University in Japan. So the format will be as usual, 20 to 30 minutes of presentation. The discussant will have 5 to 10 minutes. I may or may not add to the discussion, but then we will open it to Q&A in the chat box, and maybe people putting up hands, but it's easier for me to sort out Q&A from the chat box. If that's okay, and the Q&A is lively, anybody who has to leave at the end of the hour is welcome to leave, of course, but we may go on for another quarter of an hour. Okay, so without more ado, over to you, Deepak Johnson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Barbara Harris-White. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, and my slides are also visible now, I suppose.
Yes, Deepak.
Yeah, thank you. My PhD thesis was titled Rice Incomes and Farm Policy, Case Studies from Kerala and Vietnam. And I will be presenting some key findings from my doctoral research here. But before I do that, I would like to thank the Foundation for Agrarian Studies for offering me this platform. I was working with the FAS until 2 weeks ago before I moved to this new position. And I have been immensely fortunate to have received training on the household survey methodology from the experts at FAS. Now, let me get into the introduction. Kerala has a history of rice cultivation. The agroclimatic conditions are particularly suited for the cultivation of rice. And before independence, Much of the land suitable for rice agriculture was primarily used for cultivation of rice, and the abundant rainfall permitted growing of rice even without widespread use of irrigation. There are 7 diverse rice agroecosystems where cultivation is practiced. It ranges from below sea level polders, which are globally important agriculture heritage system, such as the one in Kuttanad region, which is in south central Kerala, to high ranges where the altitude goes up to about 1,000 meters above sea level. Now, in addition to specialized rice agroecosystems, there are Kerala is cultivating red rice varieties known as Matta rice with high nutritive value, and which are also special to the dietary habits within the state. Preservation is also valued for other historical, cultural, and environmental reasons. Now, while there has been sustained intervention from the state for the last 3-4 decades, despite having these favorable conditions, both the area under cultivation and production of rice have declined. From about 900,000 hectares of gross crop area of rice in 1974-75, the area under cultivation of rice has reduced to about 200,000 hectares currently. This was followed by a decline in production and stagnation of yields in the last 4 decades. Now I turn to another part of the world, the Mekong Delta region, which actually shares quite a few agroclimatic and socio-economic conditions, where the area, production, and yield of rice have improved at a fast pace. The production has increased from about 19 million tons in 1990 to about 44 million tons in 2012. And it has become a major producer of rice with a major exporter of rice in the recent period. This is the motivation for the comparative study that I undertook. I get into some selected indicators of climate, agriculture, and population to show the similarities. Both Kerala and Mekong Delta are located along the similar latitudes, and the mean temperatures are quite similar. Average rainfall is also more or less similar. There are some things which I have not mentioned here, but which are also shows how similar has been the condition. Both the regions have seen land reforms from the period of 1950s, ranging up to 1970s till about 80s. But there are differences too. In terms of topography, you can see that rice is concentrated in several regions and account for about 200,000 hectares, as I said a little before. But for Mekong Delta, it's much larger area in which rice cultivation is practiced. And population density is much higher in Kerala than in the Mekong Delta, which partly also accounts for the smaller size of operational holdings in Kerala as compared to Mekong Delta. Now, I would like to elaborate a little bit about the shift away from rice cultivation in Kerala. Long-term analysis of land use and cropping patterns show 3 major features. One, there has been an increase in non-agricultural area across the state. The share of area under non-agricultural use increased from 5% of the total geographical area in 1956-57 when the state was formed to about 11% in 2016-17. Scholars have pointed to growing migration and remittances from migrants as accelerating the utilization of land for non-agricultural uses. Secondly, there has been a widespread change in the cropping pattern in favor of non-food crops for a period, particularly from 1975 to about 1990s. The area under food crops declined and the area under non-food crops increased. After that, the decline in area under food crops continued, but area under non-food crops have stagnated, and area under non-agricultural use has increased. Thirdly, the most important change within the decline in area under food crops has been the reduction in area under rice. And this is also perhaps the most significant change in cropping pattern that Kerala has seen over the last 61 years. After an initial period of growth, which you can see from the graph on the right side, and the first panel, from about 1956-57 till about 1975-76, broadly coinciding with the period of land reforms. After this period of growth, slight growth, there has been a decline. And production actually mirrors this pattern with decline setting in from 1984-85. The yields of rice have also not gone up in this period. It was 1.1 tons per hectare in 56-57. It has become about 2.5 tons per hectare in 2016-17. Now, this has been a concern in public policy debates and in public discourse. And a major reason for reduction in area under cultivation and production of rice have been attributed to low profitability and low incomes. And as a response, the government, both state government and local governments, have intervened to provide support for rice cultivators in Kerala in different forms of support measures, including schemes pertaining to infrastructure marketing. There are a lot of cash transfers that's in place. There is also price support for output and assured procurement by government. In the last 4 or 5 years, we see an increased procurement and increased production, but not to the previous levels. And additionally, there have been various other measures like legislation to prevent conversion of rice cultivating lands to non-agriculture use in 2007-8, and various other institutional measures such as group farming approaches being promoted, including measures under the network of self-help groups such as Kudumbashree, which is very vital in Kerala. Now, there are two illustrations for showing how support has been for rice cultivation in Kerala. The figure on the left side is the procurement price offered in Kerala, and the blue portion is actually the minimum support price declared by the government of India. And you can see that over time, by about 2017-18 to 2019-20, we can see about 33% of the procurement price, unit price that is received by farmers in Kerala comes from the additional state incentive bonus provided by government of Kerala. And this is very crucial. As we come to the last slides, I'll show you the reason why this is very important. And on the figure 3, the figure on the right side shows one class of expenditure under budget schemes for different crops, mainly for coconut and rice. And this does not mean that these crops do not get other kinds of support. These are the only schemes which can be disaggregated in terms of rice and coconut support. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is that rice, the relative importance given for rice is quite striking. Coconut occupies the largest gross crop area. About more than 1/3 of the gross crop area is under coconut, whereas it is getting, for most of the years under consideration, less planned expenditure than rice, which is only the 3rd highest crop in terms of gross crop area, accounting for less than 10% of the total gross crop area in the state. Yeah, so the above points showed the importance of rice in Kerala. I come back to the question of what differentiated it from the rice cultivation in Mekong Delta. Both the regions are suited for rice cultivation, but while one has seen an increased crop production and area has remained more or less stable, whereas other has seen a decline. I examine incomes and costs of cultivation to see if a difference in economics of rice cultivation is leading to this, has led to this kind of outcome, and what we see currently. So the two specific research questions that I ask in this presentation is, how does incomes from crop cultivation differ in Kerala and the Mekong Delta region? And what factors, including differences in cost structure, role of government policy, explain differences in incomes from rice cultivation between these two regions? I've conducted 2 household level surveys in Kerala, and the region where I conducted the survey is the coal wetland region, which is the best performing rice agro-ecosystem in Kerala. And in Vietnam, I've conducted it in An Giang province, which is the best performing rice producing area in the Mekong Delta. Before we go into the details of the survey, the methodology of calculating incomes and costs, I've used the methodology adopted by Foundation for Agrarian Studies. This is in line with the comprehensive scheme on cost of cultivation or production of principal crops in India, or CCPC scheme. I've used 3 major cost concepts. The first cost concept is A2, which includes all paid out costs. Second one is A2 plus FL, which is all paid out costs, including rent paid for leased in land, as the imputed cost of family labor. FL stands for family labor. And the third one, C2, which is also called as economic costs, which includes all the cost components included in A2 plus FL, plus costs for fixed assets, including rental value of owned land. And the key variable of interest, which is what is there in the title of the presentation, is rice income, is defined as farm business income plus all transfer incomes received by households on account of rice cultivation. What is farm business income? Farm business income is gross value of output minus cost A2. So farm business income deducts cost A2 from the total value of output. To this farm business income, all the transfer incomes are added to reach rice income. I also use the other two income components, income concepts, net income 1 and net income 2, which corresponds to cost A2 plus FL and cost C2. But largely, I've used rice income in this particular slide. Now, for comparing incomes and costs across countries, I have converted money values using purchasing power parity to US dollar at 2017 prices. Now, coal wetland region is, the figure is on the left side, and Adat village panchayat, the village panchayat where I did my survey, is located there. You can see that my sample had about 65 households operating 120 land parcels in Adat village panchayat. The survey was conducted in April-May 2019. In the Mekong Delta, I interviewed 60 households operating 108 land parcels in Din Than commune in the period October-December 2019. Now, a bit about Adat village panchayat. The village panchayat is located at a distance of about 9 kilometers from Thrissur, the district headquarters and the nearest city. There were about 7,781 households according to census 2011, and this was in 4 revenue villages spread across the panchayat. And of the total geographical area, 45% of the total land was classified as coal wetland region, or the land which were growing rice. Now, this village panchayat has seen substantial changes over the past 6 decades, starting with the land reforms and evolution of Padashagaram, or joint farming society, which is an important institutional mechanism in this village, constituted by farmers operating contiguous field. There is only one season of rice. I would like to elaborate a little bit about Padashagaram arrangement or the joint farming societies. These are crucial to rice cultivation in Adat. So the coal wetland region is largely submerged during the monsoon season for about 5 months or so. And then for the remaining period when rice cultivation is possible, the first operation that is undertaken is to drain these polders. And this is facilitated by the joint farming society. Now, all the cultivators who are cultivating contiguous fields, which are like enclosed by physical barriers such as bunds or roads, are part of one such society by design. And there were 13 such societies operating in Adat village panchayat. They elect office bearers who then undertake activities such as pumping out water from the fields, facilitating procurement, etc. Now, the social group composition was varied. There were 8 scheduled caste households, 23 OBC households, and 34 other households. And land operated across these groups were quite varied, with average area operated to be about 1.3 hectares per household. Now I come to this final the income calculation here. Now all the households received some form of government support. Now if I remove so support provided by state and local governments were a major source in rice income. If I calculate so for the table 2, column 3 is the actual rice, the incomes received or costs incurred by the farmer households. The actual rice income is about 84,000 rupees per hectare, and the direct transfer was about 3,700 rupees per hectare. Now, if I evaluate the incomes only at the level of support given by Government of India, the rice income comes to about 27,000 rupees per hectare, which means that about 67% or 56,000 rupees per hectare is the contribution of support measures instituted by Government of Kerala and the local village panchayat. Of these support measures, the output price support, which is what is added here as gross value of output, constitutes about 89% of the total support provided by Government of Kerala and village panchayat. Now, this is a major finding of my presentation. Now, these are the forms of support that farmers were receiving in the sample. First set of measures are what is provided by Government of India, which includes the minimum support price, cash transfer under several schemes. Then comes the support measures provided by Government of Kerala, which includes the state incentive bonus, which is an additional component to minimum support price, subsidy for lime, which is calcium carbonate, which is important here to balance the acidic nature of the soil, then production incentive for farmers under 2 different schemes. And finally, the local village panchayat provides subsidy for seed. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, now Deepak, you got stuck in the middle.
Yeah, so I think we lost about
30 seconds.
All right, sure. I'll start with that. Sorry. Yeah. So finally, the support for a few farmers received support on account of organic farming, but that was not very significant. But the subsidy given for seed was quite significant from the local village panchayat. Now, there were some variability in terms of the groups of farmers. But before that, we should note that if we compare this data with that of the CCPC estimates, the cost of cultivation surveys conducted by Directorate of Economics and Statistics on an all India basis, the incomes that farmers were getting in Adat were slightly higher than even for Punjab. Like Punjab farmers on an average, but it's difficult to compare it with the state as a whole. But to benchmark the figures that we get from Adat, it was about 84,000 rupees, and in Punjab was about 80,000 rupees. And if we make it strictly comparable to CCPC, the income from Adat was even higher. Now, what was the reason for this? The yields were not very high, but the output prices were much higher for farmers in Adat in comparison to other states. Now, along with this, we should also note that I have not quantified or given a figure for the institutional support provided by RSIgram arrangements, but these do have some implications on profitability of rice cultivation in Adat. Now, there were difference in variations in terms of groups. Lease cultivators were receiving lower income. There was variation in terms of SP and other households, but there was not much variation in terms of the support received on per hectare basis between different groups of farmers. Now, if you look at the actual levels of farm business income and rice incomes, we can see that if you compare it with the poverty line from 2011-12 inflated for 2018-19 prices, and also for opportunity cost of labor, which is like non-agricultural wage into 100 days of employment, we find that majority of the households were earning lower than poverty level income, or earning incomes from rice cultivation, which was less than opportunity cost of labor. So this sums up the condition of rice cultivation in Adat, even though it's higher incomes and higher yields in comparison to other regions in Kerala and also in comparison to many other states. The incomes were not sufficient to meet the poverty line taken at the household level. And I come to Dinthan commune, which is located about 20 kilometers from Longspain city, which is the administrative headquarters of Anjang province. And Anjang province had the highest average yield in Mekong Delta for 2015-18. There were 1,900 households located in 5 hamlets in the commune. And from these 5 hamlets, I took 2 hamlets and 30 households from each hamlet. 81% of the total area of the commune was rice cultivating lands. There were 3 seasons of rice in a substantial difference from that of Adat. And there were substantial investments in terms of dike infrastructure in the region and a private agriculture research station within the commune, even though the contact with the private agriculture research station was somewhat limited. All the households belong to the same ethnic group, and average operated area was about 1.5 hectares per household. Now, there were 3 seasons in Vietnam, in the Mekong Delta. And the first season is winter spring, which extends from November to March. The second one is summer autumn, April to July. And the third one is autumn winter, August to November. Now, the winter spring, which is column number 3, you can see that the gross value of output is much higher than the other 2 seasons. It's largely because of very high yields, close to about 8 tons per hectare, 7.5 to 7.8 tons per hectare. There is not much variation in cost across these seasons, but because of high yield, the incomes from winter spring season is much higher than the other 2. It's more than double that of summer autumn season, and this is also the case for other income concepts. Now, there is variability of rice cultivation here again. The variations in terms of incomes, in terms of tenutal status, lease cultivators were getting less than the ones who are cultivating on land parcels. But in terms of adequacy of crop income, and I was comparing the household crop incomes with that of the poverty, the income poverty line used by different according to different classifications in Vietnam. We can find that about 2/3 of the households received crop incomes. That's income from rice was higher than the multidimensional poverty line for the income poverty line, not the other aspects of multidimensional poverty. And if you can consider the other 2 income poverty lines, it was about half of the households were receiving crop incomes higher than the poverty line. Now, I come to the comparison between both the places. Now, both per hectare incomes and household crop incomes were compared between the regions. The winter spring season in Din Thanh was used for comparing because the cropping season in Adat was from October, November till about March, April, which coincided with the winter spring season in Din Thanh, which was from November to March. I've also compared annual incomes between both the places, and I come to that after this. Now, what do we get from incomes for a single season when we convert this into US dollar purchasing power parity 2017 prices? Now, from Adat, row number 1, rice income actual is about $4,000 US per hectare, whereas for Din Thanh it was $1,851 US per hectare. But if we deduct the state government and local government support, which is rice income is evaluated only at the level of government of India support, the average income becomes $1,351 for Adat, which is about 27% less than the average income for Din Thanh. And here the noticeable aspect is there is no direct price support. Therefore, the rice income in both the cases is similar for Din Thanh. Now, there were differences in yield, prices, and costs. Yields were much higher in winter spring. For Din Thanh, it was about 7.5 compared to 6.5 in Kerala. Prices were also much higher in Adat compared to Din Thanh, and costs were also higher in Adat because of different reasons, like specific crop practices, operations were different for these 2 places, but wage rates were also higher for Adat compared to Din Thanh. But leaving that aside, that perhaps can be taken up in Q&A. The annual crop income for both the places were quite similar. So the first one is about, the first row is rice income per hectare for both the places. The second one is annual rice income per hectare. There is a slight difference because I have not included some plots in this one. But if you look at the annual income, we can see that for one crop, Adat is earning as much as what farmers in Din Thanh are earning for 3 crops. It's about $4,000 US and per hectare, and here it's similar. But per households, in terms of not per hectare, but if you look at it per household income, we can see that per hectare, per household income is much lower in Adat compared to Din Thanh, even though the that's largely because of the larger land holdings, land operated in Dintan compared to that of Adat. Adat was 1.3, whereas here it was about 2.7 hectares per household. Yeah. So now, why is it so? Why there are many factors that we can see which have contributed to the differences in terms of incomes in both the places. But let me situate these in the debate of price and non-price factors in agriculture development. There is a literature on this as what is the relative contribution of price factors and non-price factors in influencing agriculture development. Now, the difference in crop incomes between Adat and Dintan reflect partly the different policy approaches followed by governments in Kerala and Vietnam, in particular about price support and procurement, irrigation, and agriculture research and extension. So price support and procurement is important in Adat, where government was giving the state government was giving a added state incentive bonus on top of the minimum support price ensured by provided by the government of India. This ensured higher returns and profitability even at cost C2 in Adat. Almost all the farmers sold their rice crop produce to the state procurement agency, and this has been the case from the beginning of 2000s. Now, cost of production have increased due to various factors, including the withdrawal of government from agriculture and slow yield growth after 1990s. This has also led to increase in MSP, and some state governments such as Kerala has been providing an additional bonus. Now, in contrast to this, there is no direct procurement by state from rice producers in Vietnam, even though government in Vietnam has exerted different types of control over price through state-owned enterprises. Now, the next factor that I want to discuss is about irrigation. In Mekong Delta, the intensification of rice cultivation and the consequent increase in household crop incomes was made possible by public investments in irrigation infrastructure. The construction of dikes started in 1990s, and in particular, Dintan had seen construction of dike infrastructure completed in 2007. This improved the farming conditions in Dintan and enabled the sample farmers to transition from a previous 2-crop-based cultivation to 3-crop-based rice production system. So the added season was autumn-winter season, when normally it would have been flooded, but after the completion of dikes, farmers were able to cultivate another crop. The cold wetland region has also seen public investments from the 1950s to improve irrigation system, but these did not lead to multiple cropping. Actually, in 1970s, there was a proposal for construction of outer bunds, permanent outer bunds for Padasegaram, and this was also undertaken, and there was a construction of dam to irrigate crops in the months of preceding monsoon, which was also completed in 1996, but this did not lead to multiple cropping in Adat, and in fact, a single crop season has continued for quite a few years preceding the survey in Adat. Now, the last point is about agriculture research and extension. Availability of short duration suitable rice varieties was an important factor that aided intensification of rice cultivation in Dintan. On average, farmer grows rice for about 283 days per year in Dintan, and for a single crop, it was 94 days. There has been while rice can be cultivated for 200 to 215 days in Adat in majority of the cold wetland region, the average duration for which rice is grown is about 134 days. So this does not allow for multiple cropping in Adat as compared to Dintan. Now, the varieties which were released have been much frequent, and much latest varieties have been used in the Mekong Delta as compared to Kerala. The Mekong Delta in Dintan, the varieties which were more prominent were released in 1994 and 2011 with a yield of about 7 to 8 tons per hectare. But in Adat, the varieties which were still cultivated were released in 1974 and 1998. And there has been relatively slow development of new varieties and very slow adoption after 1991. In fact, there is a link with that of the reducing number of research universities the staff in the full-time equivalent researchers working in agriculture and the budgetary expenditure for agriculture research and research universities. Actually, the number of full-time equivalent researchers in agriculture fell from 4.7 per 100,000 farmers in India in 2000 to about 4 per 100,000 farmers in 2010s.
Deepak, this is very interesting, but you just have a few minutes left.
Yeah, 2 minutes, and then I'll be ending it.
Right.
Yeah. And then finally, so that whereas in Vietnam, the full-time equivalent researchers in agriculture increased from about 7.8 per 100,000 farmers in 2000 to about 13.6 per 100,000 farmers in 2017. Finally, coming to the extension activities also, I could see that compared to Dinten, a fewer percentage of farmers attended training programs in ADAT in 2018-19. Only 28% attended training programs, whereas it was more than 45%, 40+% for farmers in Dinten. And I found that through my own experience, I found that the role of extension workers and agriculture universities system were less prominent in ADAT than in the Mekong Delta region of Vietnam. Now, I come to the concluding remarks of my presentation. Kerala has focused on direct price support and expansion of procurement for improving incomes from rice cultivation. Vietnam, which also has a form of indirect price support, rather focused more on productivity enhancement through increased cropping intensity, research, and extension of farm services in the Mekong Delta to improve production and to improve yield. And the last point could be that there is an immediate need for further public investments in agriculture research and extension for improving the productivity of rice cultivation and to thereby increase incomes from rice for Kerala. So thank you. I would end my presentation here.
Thank you very much, Deepak. That's a very complicated comparison. And I now call on Rui Takahashi to start off the discussion. Thank you very much.
May I share my screen, okay?
Sure, Professor.
Yeah.
And I should also say, can you please start putting questions into the chat, those of you who have questions? Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
It is
Yes,
visible.
we can see it.
Okay. Okay, now getting started. My comments. Thank you very much for amazing presentation, Dr. Deepak Johnson, and thank you very much for introducing me, Professor Harris White. I am Rui Takahashi, a researcher on the field of development economics and economic history, especially focusing on the development of rural Vietnam. Today, I am honored with attending at this seminar as a discussant for Dr. Deepak Johnson's paper. As his paper is very impressive for me, I would like to give some comments for the paper with this slide. First of all, I would like to refer to the general impression for Dr. Deepak Johnson's paper. This is variable comparative studies on the rice economies based on careful field works in Kerala, India, and Ansan, Vietnam. That is generally from the viewpoint of conducting field surveys, it is hard to obtain information on income and expenditure, including the paid-out cost, at the household or individual level. However, this study succeeds in clarifying in the cost structure of rice growers and the importance of the government's subsidies. The detailed information derived from the original comparative field surveys is quite valuable for understanding the cost structure of rice farmers and considering rural development policy focusing rice economy, while the econometric methods for rural studies increases in this field. Next, I'd like to provide some discussable topics for the paper. The paper advocates there is an immediate need for further public investments in agricultural research and extension for improving the productivity of rice cultivation on the slide of 24. I am curious if ADAT in Kerala is able to adapt the development policy based on cropping the high value added rice or other crops for its development instead of raising rice productivity in the quantity. From the viewpoint of the general situation in the Mekong River Delta, the recent cropping system in the Mekong River Delta has progressed to more diversified, including animal husbandry and inland fisheries. As for rice cropping in the Mekong River Delta, some changes have appeared in recent years. For example, the cultivation and the circulation of high-quality rice, including fragrant rice, is gradually growing. In particular, ST25 is quite famous and popular as a variety of fragrant rice invented in Vietnam. The provincial governments in the Mekong River Delta also subsidize farmers cropping such high value added rice for raising rice quality, including growing organic rice, in addition to supporting raising productivity. For example, according to the report by the General Statistics Office in Vietnam, in Bac Lieu province, a southern part of the Mekong River Delta, high-quality rice accounted for 94.1% of the sown area, of which specialty rice varieties like red rice accounted for 42.4%. Fragrant rice varieties like ST24, ST25, and Dayton 8 accounted for 31.3%. And non-fragrant rice varieties such as OM5451, OM18, OM2517, and VNR20 accounted for 20.4%. Remaining rice group with medium and low quality only accounted for 5.9% of the all sown area in 2021 to 2022 season. This picture indicates the Vietnamese fragrant rice ST24 and ST25. Next, I give a little bit technical comment for the comparative analysis between the income in ADAT and Din time. As for the comparative analysis between the rice income in ADAT and Din time presented by Table 5 and Table 6, the paper adapts the t-test for comparing two means. In general, the data on income or expenditure at the household level has a skewed distribution. Thereby, means or standard deviations might be unsuited for adapting as a representative values of the data. Median and interquartile might be valid and robust such a skewed distribution. Furthermore, the median test might be more robust than the t-test for this type of analysis. So it might be useful to consider adapting median and interquartile for the analysis. Thank you. That is all of my comments. Thank you very much for listening.
Dr. Takahashi, those were extremely useful comments. And I think the questions about the conclusion, going backwards toward the front, the policy conclusion that Deepak Johnson ended up with, which was the need for agricultural research for more short duration crops in Kerala, is the one that you've really picked up on. And you have asked, why doesn't Kerala start to brand itself in the niche market for highly prestigious varieties of rice and fragrant rice, and diversify, which is the question on everybody's lips today in India: diversification in crops, diversification to animals and fish. So Deepak, this is a very important question. And would you like to answer that now, please?
Yeah, so yeah, actually that's a very valuable question. I don't think that has been thought through in the policy circles. Largely, the efforts have been limited to using the red rice variety, but which provides higher yield rather than high value added rice. So some experiments have happened in the past in the few years, such as organic farming, but limited to very few cultivators. But there again, I couldn't get the exact data, but one constraint that they were facing was the yield drop. So they were not, even when they got a premium price, the kind of incomes that they were receiving by marketing their product as organic rice and by calling itself like a specialty rice was not very high. So that could have been one reason why people are skeptical of moving towards high value added rice. But that is something that needs to be explored. I don't think I've sufficiently looked into it. About the methodological part about using median and interquartile range, I think that's a very useful suggestion. I'll try incorporating that, and I'll see how that is reflected.
Yes, so the discussant's comments are actually very, very useful, and we can perhaps revisit them towards the end. There are two good questions in the chat. Navasiya Shivayam wants you to talk more about the cost of production, more on a comparison of inputs. You did mention in your presentation that the cost structure is not similar in the two places, but he would like to you to say more about inputs, especially as you alluded in passing that some production was organic and therefore probably didn't have fertilizer. But what were the role of the different kinds of inputs in the two settings? And can you say something about the cost of production holding yields constant? That's a really difficult one, but that is his question. And then I'll go on to Sid's question afterwards.
Yeah. So about the difference in input use, fertilizer use was, again, the fertilizers that were used were different in both the regions. Fertilizer use was quite high in Adak. It was the average fertilizer use was about 700 kilograms per hectare, which is very high. Whereas for Dintan, it was about 463 kilograms per hectare. But what is otherwise very substantial point of difference is the seed rate, the seed use, basically. In Adak, the average seed use was about 117 kilograms per hectare, whereas for Dintan, it was about 200 kilogram per hectare. Now, in terms of machine use, also Adak had a higher use of machines, but that's largely to do with the conditions which are prevalent in Adak rather than because prior to sowing, it's submerged, so it takes a lot more time to make the land, to prepare the land for cultivation. So therefore, the tractor use and tiller use was higher, whereas and while harvesting, it's intermittently it rains, so the time taken by combined harvester for harvesting was also higher in Adak compared to that of Dintan. In terms of the other inputs use, human labor use was, I find, considerably lower in Dintan. And that even if you don't take these specificities into consideration, and if you look at the operations which are quite common in both the places, such as sowing or applying fertilizers or manure, the time taken or the labor use in 8-hour days, we can see that for Dintan it was much lower, and on average the total labor days for Adak was about 46 days per hectare, which is lower according to Indian standards, but in Dintan it was only 25 labor days per hectare. So it's more probably due to the use of small machines, such as which is making it easier at Dintan compared to that for Adak. About cost of production, I think these factors do play a role, and while I'm focusing more on non-price factors, these are some things which also needs to be focused, which I have explained in paper, such as reducing the labor use for Kerala is something that needs to be looked into. While even if you increase the yields, these cost components are going to be a burden on incomes. That's true. Yeah.
Thank you. Setu from FAS has a very interesting question. You said that incomes from a single season are comparable between Kerala and Vietnam. Does the picture change taking into account the non-agricultural opportunities people have in the two regions? Are farmers in Kerala better off because they have better incomes from non-agriculture? Okay, can we have that question? And then Takahashi Kurosaki has got another question below it. But let's take that one separately. So tell us about the role of the non-agricultural economy in rice cultivation in two places.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting angle which I have not explored in the paper, but I had collected data for non-agricultural source of income in both the places. So it does change the picture quite a lot. If we add non-agricultural source of income, most of the households are living above poverty line, which is kind of expected. And the part of the reason for that in Adat is the relation that the households have with Thrissur, the city nearby, by which they are able to get non-agricultural occupations in the vicinity. And that has also led to many of the households accessing or having some opportunity for being trained as electricians. And many of the households did have members who are not engaged in farming, younger people who are trained as electricians in these places. And there were also government employment and private employment, which was there, which is something which is there in Kerala. Although in Dintan, there were non-agricultural source of incomes and businesses and trade. And there was also relationship between migrants were there from the village who were working in Ho Chi Minh City and in the nearby cities. It was not as prevalent as the case in Kerala. That's probably because of the farming intensity in Vietnam. There were 3 seasons, so more people are required for farming in Vietnam. But non-agricultural occupations do change the prospect of household income in Kerala. That's a very big addition there.
Thank you. Takashi Kurosaki has a question about Padasikaram.
Yes.
And this also chimes in with the question that I have about group farming and the research design. So if I may ask my question with his or hers, did you devise a research design so that in Kerala you had group farming or joint production along with individual farming? And was that, or did you want to eliminate the comparison between individual plots and group farming in Kerala, or how did you incorporate that, if at all? And the question is, what kind of activities are offered through joint activity to rice farmers, and how on earth you calculate the value of the services that are provided jointly when you're trying to calculate the cost of production individually? It's a really good question.
Yeah. So actually, group farming is not exactly group farming, as in there is no, I mean, there is one Padasagaram where all the activities are done by the group, but all the other 12 Padasagarams, there are some activities which are facilitated by the Padasagaram, but the crop is raised by individual farmers. So the individual farmers have to go, so they have to apply manure fertilizer, which accounts for heterogeneity, and also they get different yields across different plots of land. And that's by design. It's the practice in most of these, in all the coal wetland region, where because of the difficulty in draining field, and it's difficult to drain it individually, that activity is undertaken by the Padasegaram arrangement. But they also undertake some other activities, such as at the end of the, while the crop is standing, they have to register for procurement. But none of the individual farmers register for it. It's pulled in by the Padasegaram committees, and they do the registration. Their land has to be verified by the village officer, but none of the individual farmers go and get it verified. It's this committee members who go to the village office and then get it verified or sanctioned by the village officer. They also mediate the services of for custom hiring the combine harvester, but it's not something that most of the cases, it's not something that's owned by the Padasegaram committee. They negotiate with the hiring center, and then they decide what would be the price which would be applicable for all the farmers. So most of the farmers have they incur a common price due to the involvement of Padasegaram committee. So this is why it's very difficult to, I found it very difficult to calculate the cost. But I have incorporated the cost which farmers have to pay to the Padasegaram committee on account of their expenditure on these activities. So all the Padasegaram committees, they have they keep account books in which they write down all the expenditure. They also earn some revenue, like the coconut, which are on the bunds, and then the when it is inundated, the fields are used for fisheries. Like it's the fish catch is auctioned to the bidder, so the price that the bidder pays is actually appropriated by the Padasegaram committee. It is not paid to the individual farmers. And the difference of this revenue and the cost incurred, if there is a surplus, is used for the next season by the Padasegaram committee. But most of the cases, what I found was the revenue that they earned was not enough to cover the costs. So the costs which were incurred by the Padasegaram committee was shared between the farmers on per hectare basis. And this amount which were paid by the farmers to the Padasegaram committee was accounted for in the paid out cost. So that was that was taken into the costs.
So reading it back to you, you have individual farmers. You have individual farmers who engage in some kind of collective activity brokered by the Padasegaram, and you have some group farming in Kerala. In your right now, was there the same kind of variation in Vietnam?
No. So for this comparison, I have used only the individual farming. I have taken out the organic group. The group farming was organic, right. So I have taken them out, and I have only compared the parcels which are individually managed rather than the common management.
I think that's quite important, because some people might look at the difference in the cost structures and returns and say, well, it's all due to these institutional factors which aren't in the calculation. But you're saying you're holding everything in the research design, you're holding everything as much constant as you possibly can. Yes. Are there any more questions in the chat? I can't see any. Are there any more questions amongst the audience online? We've got about 5 more minutes. May I add my bit to the discussion? Firstly, I think this is a very spirited thing to do. In the end, also not just to compare two countries and two regions, but also to try to relate it to policy, which is the result of processes which take place at different kinds of scale. The main vectors of difference, as far as I could understand, are the sheer size in the gross cropped area in Vietnam, the fact that rice is in decline in Kerala and growing in Vietnam, so they're on different trajectories, and your objective is really how to stop that decline or change and to examine the role of costs and returns in that decline in Kerala and see whether it could be turned around. One thing you don't talk about very much, but is obviously very different, is holding size. Sort of huge difference. They're quite small in both cases, but the Vietnamese average holding size is 7 times more than that in Kerala. And that's reflecting population density. And not only do you have a dense population in Kerala, it's also a different kind of social structure. It's much more shattered. It's much more segmented through caste. And then you have the different policy environments. And have you gone through systematically looking at the main vectors of difference and working out how they affect the outcomes? So that's my first question to you. The presentation showed that you certainly have considered some of them, but maybe not all. And are they the only vectors of difference between the two regions?
Yeah, in fact, I've not gone through the macro, I mean, so to speak of at the state level, the kind of differences that is there. It is not something that I could do it because I was focusing much on villages, because these villages are comparable in the sense because both of them are high productivity regions. There is a history of rice cultivation and land reforms, all of this. It was easier to look at and then connect back to the macro rather than starting from the larger structural differences and then going into the smaller picture. So that is something which I have to do, connect with the larger picture.
But it's
say the differences of the larger picture itself.
Yeah, this is really not a point of criticism. I think if you ever try to compare something similar, I started out with the rice in Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka. There was a hell of a lot of difference, as well as some similarities. So one thing to do perhaps in the future is to list very carefully all the differences and kind of think through theoretically, and maybe if you have data, what kind of difference you expect in practice in a given crop production system. So it's not really it's not a point of criticism, it's just a comment and maybe future work, because there are other things that might affect the story, and they do, because right at the end you home in very rightly on the fact that in Vietnam you've got a 90-day rice, and in Kerala you've got 120-day rice, and that affects how many seasons you can cultivate with. The next question is whether the calculation of purchasing power parity affects the comparison, because you're really very concerned with income in relation to the poverty line. And I just wondered whether in your thesis work you've actually critiqued purchasing power parity, and whether you can tell us now what the problems are with calculating purchasing power parity. Because a lot of the argument depends on that being very accurate.
Yeah, so I mean, even when we are looking at purchasing power parity, I mean, it's more suitable for measurement or comparison of GDP or macro indicators rather than household incomes, which is something that's a limitation that I briefly mentioned, but I've not looked into what are the other problems while comparing household incomes and using purchasing power parity. I've used, I mean, yeah. So that's I've not looked at or critiqued the use of purchasing power parity for comparison of household income. That's not something that I've done. Yeah.
But maybe it might be a good thing to do theoretically, because there is literature out there which criticizes it, especially for situations where you don't have tradable goods, and rice in Kerala isn't internationally tradable, I don't think, perhaps not in the way that it is in Vietnam. And you know, there are all kinds of problems with it, and I'm sure you've been as careful as you possibly can, but your result actually depends, a part of the comparison depends on that being a very accurate calculation. Well, the last sort of body of comments I had reading your paper, as well as listening to the presentation, is why you frame the discussion in terms of prices versus a body of literature which looks at technology and institutions, why it comes at the end and not at the beginning. Because in a way, that's the thing that has motivated the international comparison. And we have very interesting results. In both cases, the state affects the prices in Kerala through the MSP and procurement. And I just wondered, given that Avindranath Thakur in Jindal has just produced a paper looking at rice prices across Indian states, how much of the Kerala market goes privately, and whether the existence of the procurement system and the MSP affects open market prices, as it seems to do in Vietnam. Can you tell us a bit more about the state-owned enterprises that intervene in the rice market in Vietnam and how that affects prices? I think you explained extremely well how the state, in its various forms of support, subsidy, transfer, etc., affects costs. But part of the story is also prices. And part of the story is the open market, surely, and not just procurement.
Yeah. So so about the prices in Kerala, it's largely like more than about 80% or 85% of the households, they sell on the state as a whole, they sell it to the government, and it's very few that do not sell it. And I believe, I mean, I don't have any data to support it. I believe it's not because of not having an option to sell it to the state, but for getting a premium price, or they're having some other mechanisms of cultivating traditional variety for self-consumption, or perhaps for a premium price, like the organic farmers in my own sample did, like one farming household in my sample did actually. So that's the situation in Kerala, and the open market price in Kerala was much lower than the MSP, and there was no big player, so to speak, of, at least in the place where I did my field work, who were competing on the marketing side.
Okay.
There were smaller players, but that was largely to do with the I think it's largely to do with the whatever gets remained after state procurement. For Vietnam, the story is a little more complicated, and there lies the role of the state-owned enterprises, because there the first point of sale for both the rice that goes to the export value chain or for the domestic market is the aggregators and traders. And from there, it finally lands up in the state-owned enterprises, Bina Food 1 and Bina Food 2. I think Bina Food 2 is the one which is operating in Mekong Delta. And they are the ones who, I'm not very sure on this, but it's largely, even for the export, they are the ones who are finally engaging in government-to-government contract on exports. But I'm not very sure about this part. But there is an indirect form of price regulation that happens in Vietnamese market. Here, the price is fluctuating. It doesn't, within a range. It doesn't fluctuate too much as how you see in international markets, such as in like in 2008, when there was a spike in world food prices, that was not passed through to the Vietnamese farmers, even though a lot of them were exporting, because much of it was taken advantage by the state-owned enterprise. Similarly, when there was a price crash later, that was also not passed through to the individual farmers. It was cushioned by the state-owned enterprises. And there is a scheme of directed paddy price, which is very similar to MSP, which is supposed to be in operation in the Mekong Delta, but that is not very effective. So by government decree, farmers are supposed to get 30% of profits over the cost of cultivation, but the cost of cultivation is not well defined. It's not a cost A2 or A2 plus FL as in the Indian context. So the production cost Therefore, I mean, it's not very clear how they operationalize it, and most of the literature is saying that this is not very effective. Rather, the first portion of where state-owned enterprises are kind of insulating the domestic farmer from the price variations. That's more important here. It doesn't come off as MSP kind of policy there, but it's sort of an indirect price support there. But yeah, that's yeah. I mean, but I take your point that this should have been framed in the beginning as why price and non-price factors are important, and then come back to it during the discussion rather than taking it only in the discussion.
It's such an interesting reply. Thank you. Because the Thakur paper that just emerged shows that in states in India which have MSP and procurement, there is an indirect effect that you're describing in Vietnam. There is an indirect effect on open market prices. And what you're arguing from Kerala is actually, no, the open market prices, well, they're lower. But what you don't know is whether they're higher than they might have been if there hadn't been MSP. Yeah. Which is the question that he's tried to address. Last point, and we're probably running out of time, is about research. Dr. Takahashi also picked that up. It was a question of whether research and development can actually should be increasing productivity of low value rice, or whether research and development in rice should be actually looking at high value prestige varieties of rice. And why isn't that why aren't both those things happening in India? And there's a further question which isn't alluded to in your paper, but may be relevant, and that is that over the last 20 years, the ratio of publicly funded research to privately funded research in India has gone right down. So not only does India have a very low percentage of agricultural GDP in research and development, but it's mostly privatized. So how does your policy, which is we need more research for short duration rice, map onto the actually existing trends of decline, the dip, and the problems of publicly funded agricultural research in India?
Yeah, so the first question, okay, I definitely have to look at it, but one of the reasons why other crops can't be thought about here in the context of Kerala is because these protection or preservation of these low-lying lands are extremely important, and most of them are privately owned land, and rice is a crop which is suitable for these places. So by promoting or by extending rice cultivation, actually that's leading in a way to preservation of these low-lying lands, which otherwise wouldn't be possible if they have to go for high-value crops like spices or like other coconut or even banana. In the case of Kerala, where most other midlands and high ranges have actually gone to from rice. So part of the decline, it's also because of movement to high-value added or high-valued non-food crops rather than high-value added crops. But so along with increasing productivity, yes, high-value added crops is high-value added rice is something that has to be looked into. I don't think that's possible currently because there is no variety which is suited to the taste of farmers currently. And that is why I come to the point of public funded research. Like, even though it's limited and it's declining, there's a need for reversing it, because these are the kind of questions that otherwise won't get addressed. And if we need to have rice cultivating lands to preserve low-lying land, this is something that should be done, unfortunately. Otherwise, it's going to go out of cultivation. So that,
thank you very much. So I take away in the debate about prices and subsidies versus technology and institutions, your position is that we need tweaking, we need policies for all, yeah, in both those dimensions. It's not an either or, it's an exactly how prices and subsidies are managed and how technologies and institutions are encouraged.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we're over time. Thank you very, very much for a really innovative and interesting presentation and for your research, and good luck in the future. And thank you very much, Dr. Takahashi, for excellent discussants' comments, and thank everybody who put questions into the chat. And now back to Sandeepan and FAS.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. With Professor Barbara's permission, I shall take a couple of minutes to propose a vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to extend my thanks to Dr. Deepak Johnson for a very informative presentation. As Sandeepan said earlier, we also have our gratitude for accepting to present your work at such a short notice, Deepak. Thank you. I thank Professor Takahashi for accepting our request to take part in the seminar and his valuable comments that he had at the discussion. We're especially grateful to Professor Barbara Harris-White for chairing the session and for being very patient with us while the schedule of the seminar changed multiple times over the past few weeks. I thank Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung South Asia for their generous support in making this series possible. I also thank all the attendees for participating and making this a very lively discussion. I'm also thankful to the online team at FAS, Sandeepan, Tapas, Setu, and Rakesh for their role in conducting this program very smoothly. The next, that is the 9th seminar of this series, will be presented by Athari Janiso, a PhD scholar at the Department of Economics in Pichpilani, Hyderabad. He'll be speaking about his work, that is accounting of women's work in rural India. Is there a measuring crisis? The seminar will be held on the 22nd of December. I request that all of you make a note of this, since it is the penultimate Thursday of December and not the last that we have been doing in past months. We'll also post more details about the event on our website and social media. Our website is fas.org.in, and you can find us at FAS Agri Studies on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I request that you follow our website and social media handles to not only get updates about the seminar series, but also about the work that we do, like Sandeepan mentioned in the beginning. A recording of the previous session that featured Soham Bhattacharya is available on YouTube. He spoke about agricultural tendency in contemporary rural India. Do take a look at it if you can. This session too will be made available on YouTube in the near future. We'll be ending the session with this. Once again, thank you very much for taking part and staying through till the end. Have a good evening. Thank you.